Hello and welcome everyone to this training on using the Digital Objects module in ArchivesSpace. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by ArchivesSpace Program Manager Christine DeBella. We are using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this training. That's version 3.5.1. If you're currently using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, keep in mind that some of the features you see today may not be available to you at home. I'll try to highlight when that might be the case. We also won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementation of ArchivesSpace at your organization. So if you have a question about your implementation specifically, please email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. And do keep in mind that this training does assume prior experience with ArchivesSpace. So the understanding of how to navigate the application, how to perform basic functions within ArchivesSpace, how to create some other record types than digital object records. We won't be able to assist with questions about other ArchivesSpace functions, but you can always find help via our user manual and our listservs and the many great resources that are linked for you in your quick start guide. And then lastly, before I dive into the actual training part of this, I want to mention that all of the examples that we are using today and that you are seeing today are real collections held by ArchivesSpace member organizations. These organizations made their metadata available to the program for the purposes of education and training and in the interest of creating a more diverse set of example data. So thank you to all of those organizations. And specifically today, we will be relying very heavily on the Krispy Kreme corporate records, which are held by the Smithsonian. So almost everything we're going to see today, with the exclusion of the examples I'm going to use during our Make Representative time together later on today, come from the Krispy Kreme corporate records and from the Smithsonian Institution. So that's fun. And then finally, if you have any questions for me as this training is progressing about what is happening on your screen or about ArchivesSpace, please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen and not the chat. I'm sharing my screen and there's a lot happening, so it's hard for me to sort of keep track of everything that's happening. So if you could put things in the Q&A, that would help us triage your questions. And also we could answer some of those questions depending on the volume that comes in of the Q&A through the text response functionality. So everyone keep your eye on that Q&A because there may be good information happening there that's happening via text. So with that, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a link in the chat to the Google Drive. You should have all received an email yesterday with information about the training. You're all here, so we got that far, so that's great. But this contains the resources that you can use today, use the agenda today to keep track of what we're covering. And also there's a quick start guide, which may be helpful today, but really will help you later. So whenever you click that link, you're going to see these two items. One is that quick start guide and the other is the agenda. The quick start guide, which you should see here on my screen, is just like an 8-page document with really helpful links to lots of resources. Everyone here is from an ArchivesSpace member organization, so all of these links will work for you. Anywhere you see a hyperlink that you can click, that's going to take you out to a relevant page in the user manual. So while there's a lot of great information within this document itself, there's even more being linked to in the user to the user manual there. And then within the agenda, we've got our learning objectives covered as well as the agenda today. But I wanted to point out also within the agenda, we have a workshop evaluation. After our time together, it would be great if you could fill that out. Just, let us know what you learned, what you didn't learn, and if there's any trainings in the future that you'd like to see, be sure to include that information there as well. Our trainer core is always looking for other training topics that would be interesting to users. All right. So let's dive into the actual training. I'm going to go over a few big things about the ArchivesSpace Digital Objects module, a bit of a functional overview before diving into record types specifically. So this part, if you're here to learn a very big overview of what the Digital Objects module is, and you kind of need some conceptual information about it, this is the part for you. So the first thing to keep in mind about the ArchivesSpace Digital Objects module, and this is the Browse Digital Object screen that I've gone to just so that we have something to look at. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that ArchivesSpace is not a digital asset management system. So ArchivesSpace is a content management system. That means that you cannot ingest or store digital materials in ArchivesSpace. ArchivesSpace does not have a storage component. It supports the management of your digital object metadata, which we're going to learn how to do today. We're going to learn how to describe our digital objects within ArchivesSpace and then provide a link back to where that material is stored. The benefit of using ArchivesSpace to describe your digital objects is that it allows you to describe not just your digital materials, but also your physical collections within one single system. And then that makes both your digital materials and your physical materials discoverable within ArchivesSpace for yourself, for your staff, and then if you decide to use the public user interface for your researchers. So it can become that system of record for your digital objects and your physical materials, but it does not store the digital objects themselves. The assumption is that the files will be stored and managed maybe in a digital asset management system, but also maybe in a file server or something like that. ArchivesSpace, and you'll see as we move through this today, ArchivesSpace is kind of okay with whichever way you go, as long as you're using a renderable URI of the file is web accessible, right? So it's not like hidden behind a firewall or there's some sort of permissions thing that if you click the link, you can't access it. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about ArchivesSpace and exactly how you want to use the ArchivesSpace Digital Objects module. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you're putting all this digital object metadata into ArchivesSpace, maybe you want to do something else with it, right? You can export out your digital object metadata from ArchivesSpace, and that can be exported out as METs, mods, and Dublin Core. At the end of our time together, I'll show you very quickly where to do that, but just know that if that's something you're interested in, you can export out your metadata in that way. And then another thing to keep in mind, and we're going to see this in the training as well, is one of the most powerful things about using the digital objects module is that not only is it where you can record the metadata about both your digital objects and your physical objects and make them discoverable in one location, you can link them back to each other. So if you have an archival object within a resource record or you have an accession record that you would like to link relevant digital content to, digital objects to, you can do that. And I'm going to show you how to do that later. But what makes that really powerful is if you have, say, like a letter and you have that physical letter and it's in a folder, in a box, on a shelf somewhere, but then you also have a scan of that letter. And you've already described that material in your finding aid, in your resource record in ArchivesSpace, but you want users to know and you want your colleagues to know that you don't just have that physical letter, you also have the scan that they can look at. You can link that physical instance and that digital object instance of that material together in one descriptive record. So it saves you a lot of time and it also makes things more discoverable. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about how you can express your digital objects in ArchivesSpace. I'm going to show you how to create records in just a minute, but first I just want to talk through the differences in what I am explaining before you see me build it so that you know what's going on. So digital objects in ArchivesSpace can be created in two ways. They can be created or constructed as either a simple digital object or a complex digital object. And I know that terminology, people hear that and they start thinking like, what does that mean? Really, if you're familiar with ArchivesSpace and you're already using the resource records, or if you've ever made a finding aid, you understand the hierarchical nature of our description. And ArchivesSpace can facilitate that for digital objects, is essentially what this means. You can describe a digital object as one single level record as a simple digital object, or you could describe it as a complex digital object where you have a record that then has children under it. You can represent that hierarchy there. A thing to keep in mind about what the difference between a simple digital object and a complex digital object is, because it is a decision that you need to make at your organization about how you want to express these things, is that a simple digital object is one in which that intellectual content, so the material, is contained in one digital content file. So that means that for this example, let's say you have a scrapbook and you have scanned this scrapbook, every single page, it's 100 pages. You've scanned it and consolidated it into one PDF. For your descriptive purposes within ArchivesSpace, you have one digital content file. You have one PDF. It's a 100-page scrapbook, but you have one file. You would express that one file as a simple digital object because you just have that one digital content file. You only need to express it as a simple digital object. But let's say that you wanted to take that same example of that same scrapbook, and instead of scanning every single page and consolidating it into a PDF, you maintained every single page of that scrapbook as an individual JPEG. That would be an opportunity to express that material as a complex digital object, right? You have 100 files that you need to express there. So you need to create the children, the individual pages for that scrapbook. Intellectually, this is something that's very comfortable for us as archivists, very familiar to us as archivists. But when you're using ArchivesSpace for digital objects, it can be a little bit confusing to sort of add that added level of complexity. And we'll see that in the training today, how those two things are expressed. Another thing to keep in mind that while ArchivesSpace does have the flexibility for you to model either complex or simple variants, you may want to talk about it as an organization about which direction you want to go in terms of your description, because it does have impacts on your metadata exports. And we'll get into that later. But if you're interested in exporting out your EAD and you want to link your digital objects to your resource records to export out your EAD, that's a situation where you're going to want to have a simple digital object. And we'll get into that later. But I just want to flag that for now. If this is a conversation that you're having at your organization, please keep these things in mind, that the way that you describe your digital objects is really going to be dependent on your needs and your use cases. So before we get into how to actually create these records, I wanted to very quickly show you the difference between a simple and complex digital object and how they're expressed in ArchivesSpace. So I'm popping over here, and this is a saved resource record. It looks kind of big. I'm going to make it a little smaller. That's too small. All right, so this is a completed simple digital object. And I may have said resource record, ignore that. We're not talking about resource records. So this is a simple digital object. This has already been created and saved within this ArchivesSpace instance. It includes all of the required information for a simple digital object. As we scroll down, you may notice, well, that's not very much information. And that really is up to an organization to determine how much information they want to include in their digital objects within ArchivesSpace. There are two primary use cases for digital objects within ArchivesSpace, and if your use case is not one of these two, please drop it in the chat. I would love to hear it. There are organizations that use ArchivesSpace simply as a pointer to where their digital objects and their digital object metadata lives. So maybe you really have gone all in your digital asset management system, and you have described your digital objects and your digital content there in a way that is sufficient for you and meets all of your needs. You're simply using ArchivesSpace as that system of record for both your physical and digital materials, and your digital objects here are intended to be a starting point to get into your digital asset management system and to learn more about these materials in another system. Another use case are organizations where they don't have as robust a digital asset management system, or maybe they're using a file server and that's how they're managing their digital objects. So they are using ArchivesSpace as more of a system of record for their digital objects and their digital object metadata. And then in that case, you may be seeing more complete records, which include relevant information about language, date, extent, that sort of thing. So that's something to keep in mind. To create a digital object record, it is fairly limited in terms of what's required. But this is, again, a simple digital object. Here you see we have a title for this item. It's a videotape. We have an identifier for this item. And then here we have the file URI that we talked about for this item. So this is a renderable file URI that takes you out to the Smithsonian's digital asset management system, where you can view this image and get into and search other digital objects there if you'd like. But this is all that is required to perform that sort of connection with a digital asset management system or with your digital objects. When we're creating the record, in just a second, I'm going to create one of these live. You'll see a little more about considerations about selecting things like publish and how that will impact things. But this, again, it's a simple digital object. If you've ever created a resource record in ArchivesSpace, this will look very familiar to you. I'm going to move one tab over. This is a complex digital object that's already been created and saved within ArchivesSpace. So here you see something that's very familiar to all of us, but a hierarchy is represented here within these digital assets. So there is what reads as essentially a collection level record for these materials. And then below you have individual records, each with their own file URI being described individually here. So this would be an example. If we go back to our scrapbook, you would have the title of the scrapbook here, and then each individual page could be nested. One use case for a complex digital object may be that if you have maybe a born digital collection and you're trying to represent the file pathways that were on the hard drive of your creator, that's something that you could do here and then link to those files. So that's a complex digital object, but very similar to a resource record with a hierarchy. And from within edit mode, which to get into edit mode, you just hit edit. You see, very similar to creating a resource record, you have all of the similar you can add a child or add a sibling, and you can also use the rapid data entry. So that's how a complex digital object is expressed. The difference being the ability to create a hierarchy. And any simple digital object can easily be turned into a complex digital object if you need it to by adding those children. So that's a bit of a functional overview of what things look like and some considerations moving forward before I move into the actual demonstration of how to create these records. So I'm going to take a second and see if there's anything in the Q&A before we move on. Great. Lauren dropped in her use case. They use digital objects as pointers with limited metadata, but we include full metadata in the archival object. That's awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move into the actual creating records part of this training. I'm going to close out these two files because I do not want to use this database anymore. I want to use my training database. All right. So first, I'm going to show you how to create a simple digital object record, and then we will create a complex digital object record. Depending on the time, we may take a quick break between the two or catch up on the chat between the two, but we'll see how it goes. So from within ArchivesSpace, there are many ways that you can create records. The easiest way when you're on the staff user interface landing page, which is what we're on now, is to go to create and then select the record type you like to create. We want to create digital objects. Another option would be to go to browse. You browse digital objects, and this is the screen we were on earlier. Shows you all of the available digital objects. This is great if you think the record may already exist and you need to see if it's there. You can always browse and filter for it to see if it already exists. And then in finding out it doesn't already exist, you can move over to hit create digital object. But we'll just go ahead and go create digital object, and we'll create our first digital object record. So this is what you see within ArchivesSpace. This is a blank starter digital object record. If you look throughout this page, anywhere you see a red asterisk, that means that is a required field to save a digital object record. Let's just scroll all the way down. Please notice there are exactly 2 required fields. So this is a very limited requirement for saving a digital object record, and you're going to want to include more. So we're going to include more in our example today. But just know that to save a record within ArchivesSpace, anywhere you see a red asterisk, you better include that information or you won't be able to save the record. Another thing that I'll point out about records in general within ArchivesSpace that may be very handy right now as you're learning and implementing digital objects is that anywhere you see a question mark, and there are 6 here on the right, anywhere you see a question mark throughout the application, that is a link out to our user manual. So these are content sensitive help links that will take you to the relevant page within our user manual if one exists for this specific area of the form that you're looking at. So if you're a little confused about the file versions, which you may be, you can always click this and it will take you to the relevant page in the Help Center about digital objects and creating digital objects. So everyone here is from an ArchivesSpace member organization. You have access to that Help Center. Make sure that if you want to take advantage of that, that you do. And this is a great way to jump right into the relevant pages within the Help Center whenever you're using ArchivesSpace. So I always like to point that out. And then I'll also point out that anywhere you see the title for different fields within ArchivesSpace and you think, oh, I'm not sure what to put there, you can always roll over for tooltips. So these tooltips are suggestions. They're not suggestions, but they're information about how to include information within that field. So it might give you an example of how you could title that information or an example of how to make use of that field. If there is a relevant standard that makes this field required, or if there's a reason that field is there, then that relevant standard will be referenced in the tooltip. So it's just another great and helpful way to learn more about how to use the application, and if you have questions to get those answered. And the tooltips are also completely customizable. So if you have a different way of doing things at your organization, or you want a note to indicate that someone should never ever use that field, you can always customize those tooltips, or the person who manages their implementation can customize those tooltips. All right, so to create a digital object record in ArchivesSpace, you need to provide a title and an identifier. I have a few little examples that I'm going to be using today. So I'm going to go take my title. And again, this is from the Smithsonian Institute's collection. I did not make these up. And you need an identifier. Now, as we're moving throughout the application, you'll see that there are these little publish checkboxes, and you'll see them more as we open up different subrecords within the digital object record. If you want to be very granular about what parts of your record you are publishing, that you can select these individual publish checkboxes. However, if your intent is to ultimately publish this record in its entirety, I'll show you how to just select publish all at the end. And that's just, your insurance that the entire thing was published. You don't have to worry about making sure that you're going through and checking all these publish checkboxes, but I do plan to publish this record, so I'm going to select publish. Again, here, if you're using ArchivesSpace to record specific information about your digital object, you could do that here, but it's not required, so you don't have to. I'll leave these blank. At this point, I could save the digital object record, but I do want to include more information about it. So I obviously want to include a file version. I want to include a link to where this content lives. So to do that, I would go to the right side and select Add File Version. When you do that, it opens up another set of fields for you to complete. Please notice that when I opened up Add File Version, suddenly I have a new red asterisk. So anytime you open up a subrecord within ArchivesSpace, there may be some things there that are conditionally required. Now that you have opened up this subrecord, there is information that you need to include if you'd like to use this subrecord. So if I open that up in error and I say, oh, I don't really want to do this, you can always remove, and that way you don't have to deal with this red asterisk that you don't know what to do with. But I do want to include a file URI here. So this field, this file URI field, is where you would include the link to the digital content, which I'm going to grab from my spreadsheet and drop in here. And again, you see you have another publish checkbox, so you can select that if you'd like. And please notice also, as soon as I hit publish, the ability to make this representative became available to me. So if you wanted this to be a representative image, I'm going to spend a little more time talking about the make representative functionality later. So I'm going to breeze over that part now, but that is now an option. I could make this particular file version representative. And this would be great if I was using multiple file versions for this. Like maybe you had your use copy, which is a JPEG, and then you had your preservation copy that was a TIFF. You would want your use copy to be your representative file. And to that end, you can always include a use statement here. We are going to talk more about use statement later, so I'm going to go ahead and include one here. I'm going to say that this is the service copy for this. I'm going to ignore the Xlink actuate attribute and Xlink show attribute for now. We'll talk about those a little bit more during the make representative functionality discussion in a minute. And then again, here, this is where you can include information about the file. If you do want to include that within ArchivesSpace, it's not required. Like Lauren said earlier, if you're just using it as a pointer like they are at her organization, you may not want to include all of that information, but to get that pointer, at the very least, you need to include the file URI. At this point, the items after this look very relevant or very familiar to those of us who have created resource records. You can add a lot of different sub-records here. I'm going to go ahead and add a date. I'm going to hit add date. And again, notice as soon as I hit add date, there are required fields that I need to include if I would like to include the date information here. I could remove it if I didn't want to and I changed my mind. I'm going to include a human readable date and a machine readable date. That's just my preference. Neither way is wrong. To include a date there. We also could add any relevant agents and subjects. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but I'll go ahead and link those here now. So we know, for example, that this is from the Smithsonian. So I'll just add that. And we'll talk a little more about linking later. So I won't get too into it. I could also add relevant subjects here if I wanted. And you could just build out this digital object record as much as you'd like. And then you hit Save Digital Object. All right, so you get green, that means good. If you get red, it'll tell you where there were errors or maybe some missing information, but we now have created this digital object within ArchivesSpace. Like I mentioned earlier, you can go through and hit publish in the different areas that you want to hit publish and try to make sure you include everything there. But for me, the easiest thing is just to hit publish all if you know you want to publish everything. And once you do that, your record is published. ArchivesSpace usually takes a little second for it to go to the public user interface. I'm going to go ahead and click view publish and see if it's made it, but it might not. Oh, it did. Okay, perfect. It's going fast today. All right, so this from the public user interface, this is what the digital object that we just created looks like. Not a ton of information because we didn't include a ton of information, but there could be more information there about the relevant digital object. And then you see here, you have an icon of a file and a link that if you hit go to file, which I'm going to select, it takes you out to, this is the Smithsonian, but it takes you out to where the file lives so that you can view the image. So that is how you create a simple digital object in ArchivesSpace. Fairly simple to create that record, and as long as you have that renderable file URI, you can link out that way. Since we are ahead of schedule, I'm going to go ahead and catch up on the chat and see if there's anything in the Q&A or the chat.
Jessica, there's one question that maybe would be worth just talking a little bit about live, and that would be SDS about creating identifiers. And she says it's hard to intellectually wrap her head around that. So just if you want to maybe just talk a little bit about different ways people might think about creating identifiers.
Yeah, so I'll also just say in the chat, if anyone has any institutional policy around how they create their identifiers, please drop that in the chat as well. That would be cool to see how other organizations are handling it. Let's see. I was trying to look to see and find the question, but yeah, okay. Creating identifiers, yeah. So for identifiers that within ArchivesSpace, that's typically going to be an institutional practice for you. I'll tell you that the reason why this identifier is RCD002 is because RC is the abbreviation for the repository that we are in within this specific instance of ArchivesSpace. If you go to select repository, you see that's the repository that we're in. DO stands for digital object, and this was the second digital object created. This was the identifier sort of structure that the trainers came up with within ArchivesSpace to help us understand exactly what we're looking at. But it's very common to have, maybe an abbreviation for your organization or your specific division or repository at your organization, and then a numeric system. You may also have something within your identifier that indicates the year that it was accessioned or the year that you brought it on, and maybe it was like in 2024 and this is our third accession, that sort of thing. So I'd be curious to see what other people say about identifiers. And Christine, if you have any examples that you'd like to give. But yeah, that's the answer to why that identifier looks like that. Okay. Any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A worth answering live right now?
So there's a question also, and that's great. People are jumping in
Yeah.
to explain how they create identifiers, because it really is another, it depends type thing. And Hillary, this might also be, but Hillary has a question about use cases for using the external documents section with digital objects.
That's a great question. The external documents section, let me minimize some of these chats that are happening. So the external document section, you'll also see this within resource records and accession records. This is not the location to put the file URI for the digital object you're describing. That would go up in the file URI section. The external documents are intended, this is intended to be kind of informational. So you may have some documentation around maybe an inventory that you want to include, or some background information about this material that you want to include that is somewhere else, either on a server, or you could even potentially put as the location, like, this information is stored on Jessica's computer. Another option would be if maybe you have information about this object that lives somewhere else, maybe at a different organization, another organization that collects similarly or has information about a particular person, or even like a Wikipedia article. You could put a link to that there. This is intended really to be information that that builds up and sort of supports the description of your materials. It's not a place to put the actual file URI or the document that you are describing in this digital object record. Let me know if that helps.
So then I think you're caught up, Jessica, with questions.
Wow. Okay.
The rest are comments.
Cool. All right. I really thought it would take me longer to create a simple digital object, and I have no idea why I thought that. So we're scheduled to take a break after creating simple digital objects, but since it's still early days, I'll go ahead and move on to creating complex digital objects, and we'll take the break after that at around 12. We'll try just to hold our breaks to their time instead. This is good. It'll leave time for ample Q&A at the end, where I anticipate the Q&A being. So we've created our a simple digital object here. Like I said, very easy to do, minimally required record. Now I'm going to show you how to create a complex digital object. So I'm going to go back to the browse screen. Yeah, I don't know what I did. I'm going to go back to the browse screen here and hit create digital object. And this is an example of a complex digital object. So this is what I'm going to create here. I'm going to go back to my example. So I'm going to create a record for, these are Alabama retail shops for Krispy Kreme, by the way. That's what we're creating a record for. The title and the identifier. So this identifier is directly from the Smithsonian. So this is the convention that they've created for their collections. I'm not going to hit publish. I'm just going to hit publish all at the end at this point. So I'm going to ignore these buttons. And that is all I'm going to do for this top level of my digital object. So I'm going to hit save digital object, and it's now saved. So all I've got is a title and identifier. I just needed to title this grouping of digital object materials, and now I'm ready to build out the children. You have a few options for how you could do that. You could use the rapid data entry tool. I'm not going to use that today because I'm just adding 2, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense to use that tool. But if you're doing something like I described earlier, where you're adding like pages of a scrapbook or something like that, where it's essentially going to be the same information over and over, but the things that are really changing are maybe like the title and the file URI, and that's it. Rapid data entry is a great option because it allows you to create essentially a spreadsheet from within the application. It also validates for you as you go. So it's telling me that this can't be saved because I don't have required information in the fields. And then you can always validate your rows at the end as well. You can create templates for rapid data entry as well. So if Maybe you have student workers doing things in ArchivesSpace and you want them to be able to work in the application directly. Creating an RDE template for them is a good way just to make sure that they're applying the correct information. But like I said, I'm not going to do that today. What I am going to do is I'm going to create my my children by hitting add child. So this way you're manually creating each individual record. When I hit add child, you see that from under Alabama retail shops, I now get a new record. It just says new digital object component. And I am going to go back to my spreadsheet and grab the title here. And I'll point out now we're seeing these gray asterisks. So anytime you see a gray asterisk within ArchivesSpace, that means that something is conditionally required. What it means here is that you either need to include a title or a label, and that's what the gray asterisk means. It means that there's an or happening. You have to include something, but you can choose which. So here you could either add a label to your digital object component if you wanted to do that, if that's how you manage your digital object components, or you could add a title. I'm adding a title. And then below that, again, we have sub-records that we could add, and I'm doing a file URI, of course. Copy that. Add my file URI. And again, you can include as much information as you wanted. I'm going to include a date here for these. And notice, again, anytime dates also have a conditional requirement. You either have to include a date expression or machine readable begin and end dates. I'm going to do inclusive. Like I said, I do both. We could add an extent here, which I'll go ahead and do. So we're going to say that this is one, we'll say one photographic slide. If I had some external documentation about maybe Krispy Kreme plants and retail shops in Alabama, I could include that there. That would be a great use of the external documentation here. But that's all I'm going to include for this record. Now I can either hit save here, or I can go and hit save digital object component down at the bottom of the left-hand navigation. Another option, and that's the one I'm going to click, is I'm going to hit this +1. So whenever you're creating component record types, whenever you see the option to do this little +1, what that means is save the record I just made and open a new record template of the exact same type in the exact same position. So that's what I'm going to hit. So you see my digital object component record was saved, and you can see the file URI there. And now there is another child record of Alabama retail shops at the same level as the record I just created. If I'd wanted, I could have, no, I'll create it again. If I wanted to, I could have created a child or sibling record, and I'll do it now from the record we just created. You would add a child if you wanted to have hierarchy, and later on in the training, I'm going to show you some more hierarchical records. Once we get into things like the make representative functionality and some other stuff, we're going to look at some more complex records. But if you wanted to add children here, you could do that. Or I'm going to hit add sibling, which means, again, a blank record at the exact same level of the record that I just created. Let's go back to our spreadsheet. Provide that title. Grab that file URI. All right. I am going to add a date just because I want to be consistent. And I'm going to save that digital object. All right. So at this point, we have a complex digital object here. Remember that I did not hit publish anywhere as we were moving along, and there's even a note here warning me that even if I had hit publish here, the the ancestor record, the parent record, the Alabama retail shops record was not published. So you would not be seeing this material in the public user interface. So I do want to see this in the public user interface. So what I'm going to do now is go back to Alabama retail shops, and I'm going to hit publish all. So this will, when you are dealing with a hierarchy, when you hit publish all, it will publish all component records. So just keep that in mind. That may not be your intent when you're dealing with something that has a hierarchy and there's multiple records at play. But if you hit publish all at the parent level, it will publish everything. So all of those records have now been published. Let's move over to view publish to see what this looks like in the public user interface. I'm moving too fast for the application. It'll catch up, but not just yet. While we wait for that to catch up, are there any questions, Christine?
No. Oh, wait a second. Maybe just one just came in. So someone asked, what's the difference, the functional difference between a label and a title?
Yeah, let's look at that. This would be a great time to use your tooltips for sure. So this will give you an example of when you might want to use a label instead of a title. So a title is going to be something that you as the archivist create that is more description of the item at an intellectual level, and your label is probably going to be more descriptive of what the thing is itself. So a label of what this item could be. So it could be like this is saying it could be an audio tape. You could be describing it as an image, but it depends on how you want to describe this digital material within ArchivesSpace. Do you want to give it more of like an intellectual description, more of a title, or do you want to apply a label? And that just is, again, that's a decision that you would make at an organizational level, and just, you know, try to be consistent about that across the board and how you manage your digital objects. All right, let's see if it caught up. It did. Okay, so this is our complex digital object record within ArchivesSpace that we just created. Again, a fairly minimal parent level record because we don't have a file URI or any digital content we're linking to specifically here. We're just trying to give it that like intellectual sort of umbrella at this level. But as you see, just like with a resource record and just like with the hierarchy for resource records on the right hand side, you do have the ability to move through the component records. So let's click on one of those. And just like with the simple digital object that we created earlier, you have all of the descriptive metadata that you include, depends on what all you want to include. And then there is the icon here that says go to file. And since you have provided it with a renderable file URI, you or a user can hit that, and you're taken to this picture of people making donuts. I am regretting doing a bunch of pictures of donuts at lunchtime now all of a sudden, but that is how you can access the files. And then you move down to the next child record, click, and you're provided with another image of donuts. So that is how you would create within ArchivesSpace simple and complex digital objects. We are just so ahead of time right now. Any questions about that? Or Christine, anything you would like to add?
Nothing from me, but there is a question just now of, are the child DOs browsable independently in the PUI?
So when you set in the PUI, okay, so let's move over to the PUI. So when you say independently, like you just want to look at component records, I don't think there's a way to limit that specifically, but yes, you can browse. Oh, what's going on? Oh, wait, because I'm hitting the wrong thing. You can, well, within the staff user interface, you can. Christine, within the public user interface, is there a way to browse component records?
Yes.
Yes.
You can, pull things up that are a child of a DO rather than the full thing. Yes. Someone else asked if you could use both label and title.
Yes, you should be able to use both label and title. I've never done it, but we can do it together and test. But you should be able to use both label and title. Let me get back to the staff interface. Let's browse our digital objects. Let's go to our component records. So if you can show component records for your digital objects from within the staff user interface. So that's what I'm doing to open up this digital object component in edit mode, which we already provided a title to. So let's just give it a label of image, save digital object component, and there you go. You got both.
And the last question here right now is the quote digital object organization text modifiable? So I think what's showing in the interface there.
In the public user interface. Yeah. All right, so we can go to the public user interface. We'll hit view published and go there. All right, so the digital objects organization, do you mean specifically this information? Because these are the titles that are pulling from the record we created. If you want to change like this language digital object organization, I don't think that that is customizable within the config file. You probably would have to use a plugin, but Christine, correct me.
You would definitely have to create a plugin.
Okay. Yeah. But this information itself came directly from the title. So that's how you would change any information there that you wanted to change. All right. Any other questions?
You're caught up on what's been typed in there so far.
All right. Well, in that case, I think that we'll go ahead. Let's go ahead and take a break. And I may reconfigure the agenda a little bit, but let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. Please drop questions in the chat. I want to catch up on the chat during the break. That's kind of what I want to do right now. So everybody take 10 minutes. Any questions that you have that are coming to mind, drop them in the Q&A. And when we come back from this break, we'll go through those questions together. So before you leave, drop those questions and we will come back like 1 or 2 minutes after the hour. So we're going to go ahead and pause for a moment.
Jessica, if you're there, Jamie followed up on her question and maybe about browsability of those children components of a digital object. So maybe you could just pull up your example.
Okay.
For your complex digital object, and let's look at it in the public interface.
In the public. All right, sounds good.
Yeah. So if you pull can you pull up that complex one? And the pieces of it that are over there in the organization. The question is, do those show up? Like if we're on a browse screen, would Alabama, Birmingham, like that piece of it show up?
Yeah, I'm not seeing them.
Not in that list. And I wonder if you search for it, if you search for Birmingham, does anything show up? Are any of those 6 pieces the component?
Yeah, that one is.
Yeah, so you can get to it. You can get to it. It's just not going to be in the full browse list, but it is searchable. Okay. There are a couple more questions. You want to hold these
Yeah, we'll
until
just
after
hold
the
them.
break?
Yeah, we'll
Okay,
do that. So we'll do
sounds
them all
good. All
together.
right, we'll
Yeah.
hold these till after the break.
Yeah. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started again. There's a couple questions in the Q&A, but if you have any that have come to mind since you sat back down, please drop those in to the Q&A and we will answer those. Before I dive into that, I wanted to go back to Jamie's question earlier about what when you're in the public user interface, how discoverable those component records are. And I think, Jamie, your question specifically was about if you're browsing digital materials, do those component records show up? So during the break, we played around with it, and the answer is within the browse screen, the answer is no. So that is something to keep in mind. You can see the Alabama retail shops here. That's that parent record that we created, but those two individual component records are not browsable. You can search for them. So I'm going to minimize my Q&As to make it easier. All right. So you can search for them. So we're going to search for Birmingham to try to, oh, I have too many open now. So this search that I just did in the public user interface, I just did a basic keyword search. That's going to search across all published records within ArchivesSpace. So what we're seeing here are 6 results that include the word Birmingham. And I can tell just by following my breadcrumbs that most of these are physical materials that are represented in the resource record for the Krispy Kreme corporate records. But here I see I have a digital object, and this is the digital object component record that we created. So for a user, those digital object components are going to show up within a search, but not a browse if they're using the public user interface. But if we go to the staff user interface, which I just flipped over. So now we're in the staff user interface. If we browse digital objects in the staff user interface, you can select show component records. So here we're not seeing any component records by default, but if you hit show component records, then you're going to start to see archival object components show up in your browse. As a staff user, this is where I spend most of my time. So that's how I knew how to do that and not the PUI. And if you are, you're thinking more about like staff users having this sort of access, but you're worried about them editing records when you might not want them to, there are permissions that you can give people accounts where they're view only and they're not able to touch your data and change it. So that, Jamie, I hope that clears that up a little bit, but if you have another question or some follow-up on that, drop it into the chat or into the Q&A. I'm going to pull up the Q&A to see where we're at.
Jessica, I can
yeah.
do that one about the PDFs if you'd like.
Okay.
So Claire asks about, what a digital object looks like if you have a paper, if you have a PDF file. Is it a hyperlink? Is it the image? Is it the title? So in general, if you've attached it to an archival object, what you'll get is a link. And it's public file version, you'll get a hyperlink to it. We have there's some development requests related to adding that to additional types of records. For example, if you have a digital object linked to the top level of a resource in previous versions, some of the previous versions, that hyperlink wasn't appearing for your digital object that was linked at the top level of the resource. In future versions, there will be more of that kind of information. But yes, in general, it's a hyperlink to that information.
Thanks. All right. Lauren asks, can you discuss any specific advantages to using the digital object components as pointers to assets living in an external DAMS versus just including links and different notes in the finding aid? I've seen that done at other institutions and wonder why they don't use digital objects in ArchivesSpace. I'm trying to decide the most efficient method of linking to our digital assets in our DAMS from the finding aid. I would not plan to include descriptive metadata in the digital object. If we do go that route, maybe it's just a preference thing. So Lauren, the first thing I would say is this is a great question for the listserv. So I would pose this to the user group listserv and see what kind of response that you get. And then also, we are a group of 62 people. So if anyone has any thoughts on this, or if you are using if you are linking your digital objects in that way to your record, your resource record, maybe you could explain why you have decided to go that route. I think that it depends. It depends on your use case and what you would prefer to do. I'm curious, like, what field do you put that link in? I would be interested in knowing more about how people are using it in that way. Something to keep in mind always is, like, do you ever intend to export information out of ArchivesSpace? And if you do, what formats do you intend to get it exported out of? And, and just be mindful that, like, if you're using ArchivesSpace in a way that or any system in a way that it wasn't necessarily intended or modeled after, there may be implications down the road. So that's something to keep in mind as you're doing that. It could have implications. That being said, there could be good reasons for expressing your digital objects through a resource record instead of a digital object record, especially if you're talking about things like complex digital objects. I would still recommend describing them as digital object instances. And I've seen some and heard some kind of persuasive arguments for especially born digital material being described as a resource record, so described in a more traditional way with a hierarchy there, and then the file path being linked out as a digital object. And I think that there are use cases for using resources like that. I'm not sure if including it as a note type is the way you want to go, though, if you want to link it out and do other things with it. But I would say, people in the chat, if you have suggestions or you know anything about it, doing it that way, put it in the chat. Please take this to the listserv. I think it's a great question. And I see that Christine is also typing an answer, so she'll be able to give you some good information there. All right. And then Hillary asks, if there's extra time, can you demo creating and using the template for the rapid data entry? We may have time, but I'm probably not going to demo using RDE just because that can be a can of worms. I will say that in addition to there being information within the user manual on RDE, there's also a tutorial video on how to implement RDE and to make templates in the Help Center that you might want to look at. But we'll see how we are on time. But for creating those sorts of templates and managing RDE, I would say that user tutorial video is a great resource. And I will mention, Hillary, that I'll also go over important export options for digital objects that other than just doing them directly within the application. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on. I think we're all caught up in the Q&A. Obviously, we are a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's good because I think that I was overly ambitious, only allocating 20 minutes for make representative functionality. So that's probably for the best. Since we have been getting some questions about discoverability and linking content, I'm going to invert these two. Instead of going over spawning digital objects now, I'm going to talk about linking digital object records to an archival object record, and also linking subject and agent records to digital objects, just to give you an idea about how you can make your materials more discoverable, and then how you can link your archival object and digital object material together. I think that might help with some of the Q&A. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to very quickly show you how to link relevant subject and agent headings. This is the simple digital object that we created earlier. I'm going to open that up in edit mode. So here's that record. I did very briefly link one agent there. And so I wanted to go over this and talk a little bit more about linking subjects and agents. Of course, we have separate trainings about, managing subjects, agents, and classification. So I'm not going to dive into how to create these records, but I did want to go over them very briefly and to just give some context for how you might want to link your relevant subject and agent records. The power of subjects and agents is that you're able to link relevant collections through the shared thesaurus, and you can use anything, your own local sources, Library of Congress subject headings, whatever shared vocabulary that you use at your organization, you can implement within ArchivesSpace and then link those relevant collections together. When we are talking about agent records, we are talking specifically about people. So people as in a person, a family, a corporate body, which, not really people, and software within ArchivesSpace. So these are entities that we're talking about. So even if that agent, that person, or that corporation, that entity is the subject of your collection, they are still an agent within ArchivesSpace. And if you don't retain anything else that I say about agents and subjects, please retain that when you are linking a person, a family, a corporate body, or a software, you are creating an agent record. Even if they are the subject of the collection, they are still an agent. So let me show you what I mean. So here we have, I've already created this one agent record earlier where I linked the Smithsonian Institution because they're the ones that provided us with this information, and I gave them the role of source. Let's add, go away. I don't want that. All right, so let's add another agent. So to add another agent, you can either hit add agent link up here at the upper right, or this plus button. So I'm gonna hit the plus button. So here I'm going to add Krispy Kreme is what I'm looking for. So I already know that this agent exists because I made sure all of these were created in advance. But if you're not sure, you can always use the type ahead feature and see what pops up. If nothing were to pop up, you have this little drop down on the right. You can click that, and that would give you the option to browse. This will open up a browse screen for all agents, and you can browse through and filter your results. If you feel like, no, I do think that they're there, maybe they're misspelled, you can browse. Or if you know that the agent does not exist within the system, you can select create, select the type of agent that they are, and you have a new empty field that you can create this agent within. Keep in mind, and you will see this now that we're starting to link records together, whenever you're creating a record type, an agent, a subject, anything within a pre-existing record, whenever you create that new record, it's going to say create and link because you're creating the record and making that connection through that linkage. But keep in mind that the record itself does now exist in ArchivesSpace separate from this link that you've created. So if you realize an error, like, oh, I didn't mean to create that record, this isn't relevant, and you remove the link from it, the record still exists. You now have created that within ArchivesSpace. You just removed the linkage. You didn't edit or change the actual record that you created. So that's just something to keep in mind. So here I already know Krispy Kreme exists though. So type ahead, select, and then here I can designate a role. They are probably the creator of this collection, correct? So I'm going to hit that. Now I'm going to add another agent here. It's still Krispy Kreme, but they have a different role here. They're also the subject. So that's what I mean whenever I say do not create people, family, corporate bodies, softwares as subjects. Create them as agents, that's what they are, and then designate their role as subject. And that is true for any link that you're creating for any record type within ArchivesSpace. Agents should always be an agent. Their role is the thing that can change. They can be the creator, source, or subject. They should never be created as subjects. And I'm saying this a lot because I see this all the time. I had to do that cleanup project myself in the past, so save yourself the headache. So that's how you would link agents and then designate their role within this collection or material or digital object record. Subjects are a little bit easier. Hit add subject. Same as an agent, you can use the type ahead feature to find a collection. So I already know donuts exist because I put it there. But if I knew it wasn't, I could browse or create the same as an agent. Let's see, Alabama. Let's just add that. So you can continue to add subjects as you see fit until you had all of the subjects and agents that you wanted to link to this digital object record. I'll go ahead and hit save. And now anytime you're browsing subjects or agents, if you or a user were to select donuts as a subject, this material would show up. So we can go to Browse, Subjects, and you see these are all of the relevant subject terms available within this ArchivesSpace instance. Let's see. We see donuts. So if we hit View, this shows us the subject record for donuts and all of the relevantly linked records there. So the record that we just linked, the digital object component, is now a linked record to the subject heading, as well as 3 pre-existing records. 2 are resource records and 1 is an archival object record. So that's how you would be able to search or browse for relevant subjects and agents. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is actually show you how to take a digital object record that we've created, which we're going to continue to use this example that we just added those subjects and agents to, and how to link this digital object record to an archival object record in your resource records. So what we're going to do now, this is an example of when you would have both the physical material and the digital material within your holdings, and you want to make sure that you know, your colleagues know, your researchers know that you have this material in 2 different instances, right? Like you have the physical thing you can hold in your hand and put in a folder and put in a box and put on a shelf, and you have the digital material that lives somewhere on a file server or somewhere, or in your digital asset management system. You want people to know you have this. It's available in 2 different ways. So you would do that by adding this digital object instance, linking this digital object instance to your archival object record. So for the example that we're using today, this record already exists within the larger Krispy Kreme corporate record. So I know that. So I'm going to go ahead and search for it. All right, so you see now I searched for the title of that record, and we have several things coming up now. So I can see there's the digital object that I just made, and that we all just made together. And then I can also see here's the archival object record. And this browse screen is telling me that this archival object record is found in the Krispy Kreme Corporation records, within the photographs series and the retail shops and plants sub-series. And that's why I'm seeing some other materials pop up here related to that. So let's go ahead and go here. All right, so what have I just done and why does this look like this? So what I've just done is I have opened up the archival object record for this photograph of the Government Street Krispy Kreme. And you can see that we were just dropped into the middle of a very large resource record. So if I scroll here, I can see that I am within the Krispy Kreme Corporation records. I can see that if I follow some breadcrumbs and if I go up to the top, and I can see that there are many series, but the series that is open is photographs, and the sub-series that is open is retail shops and plants. And as I scroll down, the highlighted file, the file that I'm currently in, is this Mobile, Alabama Government Street photo. So that's where we are. So you can always follow the breadcrumbs to get back to where you are if you do what I just did and open up a record in the middle of a larger context. So you can do that. So now if we scroll down, we see this is an archival object record. So it does look very similar to the digital object records that we've been creating, but it does include different basic information about the archival object record we're describing. Now, to add the digital object instance to this description, what you would do is you would either scroll all the way down to instances, or you can use the left-hand navigation just to go to instances. So you can do it either way. And I can see here that there's already this one, and I can see just looking at it, there's already an instance of this material. This is telling me that we do have this physical photograph. It's in box 19, folder 7. And if I wanted to pull that, I could open up this box, view it, see where that information is. That's not really what I'm here to do, but I know that this physical material does live somewhere. I want to make sure that I know and my researchers know that we don't just have the physical item, we have the digital object. So to do that, you would add a digital object instance. you see you have two different options here, and you have two different options here. You have container instance and digital object instance. Container instance, that is if we're talking about physical material, we're talking about things that you can put in your hand and put on a shelf or put away somewhere. We're not talking about digital files. So maybe if this was also on a microfilm somewhere, and that was in a separate box and maintained in your offsite storage, you would add a separate container instance for that. And you could have a use case for several container instances, but that is not what we are talking about. We are creating digital object instances. You only create digital object instances when you're talking about digital objects and material that you are linking back to your digital asset management system or your file server through that file URI. And I'm saying that because this is where I do see some confusion, where people will create a digital object instance for something like microfilm or a floppy disk or something like that, because it is a digital format, but that is still a physical item that you can pick up. One of our other trainers says if it's something you can pick up and throw, it's a container instance, but you shouldn't throw anything in your archive. But it's the same is true. If it's a physical item you can hold in your hand, you create a container instance. Digital object instances are just for these examples that we're seeing today. So to do that, you would hit Add Digital Object, and you see another instance popped up here. It looks different than the container instance because you're including different information, but you have a digital object option here. Just like with subjects or agents, if you already know the record exists, you can use type ahead. We do know the record exists, so we'll use type ahead in just a moment. But if you don't know if the record exists, you can browse for it, and ultimately you can create it. And if this could be an easy way to create digital objects if you know that you're working through material that you want to link to your archival object record. So you just create it from directly within that archival object record, and the link will already exist and the digital object will already exist. A couple things to keep in mind when you are creating these links. If you are creating it from within your archival object record, if I hit create and I create a digital object record, and this looks very familiar, we've looked at it for the past hour, a digital object record, and I hit create and link, like I said earlier, the record that you created now exists within your archive space and you know has its own context, and you can do other things with. Removing the link doesn't remove the record, and you have created a simple digital object. That is the record type that you have created. If you want to have links like these, if you want to link your digital object instances to your archival objects, you will need to either create simple digital objects or understand that you can only link to simple digital objects or the top level record of your digital object. If you're building out these hierarchical descriptions of your digital object records, you cannot link the digital object instance back to your archival object instance. Digital object instances that are being linked are going to be simple in nature or either top level hierarchical records. So that's something to keep in mind. It's also why many organizations do elect to go with the creation of simple digital objects over complex digital objects, because they do want to provide this link, and they also want to export this out as EAD. So if you're looking to export your EAD, this is something to keep in mind. So let's go ahead and make that link. So I knew this already existed, so I went ahead and did type ahead. I type ahead, and here is that record that we created earlier today available. So I'm going to click that, and now these two things are linked together. Well, they will be once I save them. You also have the option of selecting make representative here. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Like I said, let's just ignore that for now, but we will talk about what that means in a little bit. So let's go ahead and save our archival object. All right, so now we have created that link to that digital object instance, and you can tell because now we see that not only is the physical instance listed, but we now see there is a digital object instance here as well. And when you look to the left-hand side, we have two instances for this item. So that's how that link has been created. Go ahead and publish all. and we'll view published. All right, so this is what this record looks like now that I've included the digital object instance there. And as you look at, this is the public user interface, and we are looking at this file within the larger Krispy Kreme corporate records. Again, I jumped right into the middle of the finding aid from within the context we were working in. But if you ever find yourself in a situation like this and you're like, oh my gosh, how did I get here? Always follow your breadcrumbs. So we know what record we're in, we know our subseries, we know our series, we know our collection, and we know the actual repository within ArchivesSpace we're in because we follow our breadcrumbs. You can also just scroll up and find it through the collection organization as well. And the collection organization will always highlight where you're in. And we know all of this information is included as part of the archival object record for this photograph. So there's a lot more here, a lot more context here for this finding aid. And now we have this link to our digital object record as well. So again, we see that little icon and we have a go to file. We click go to file. And there's that picture of the Krispy Kreme donuts that we've seen before. Or you could scroll down and see where it links the digital material available, and you could select that. And if you select that, it doesn't take you to the digital file itself. It takes you to that digital object record that we created earlier today. So if you see a thing that says go to file, it's going to take you to the file itself. But within the context of the linked instance, you can scroll down and get to the digital object record. So that's how you could navigate that within the public user interface. Any questions about linking digital objects, or Christine, anything you want to add?
So I answered one question that was just like reiterating what you had said. But maybe since we're at a stopping point, maybe you just want to answer the question about whether it's possible to link digital objects to a non-item level folder. Like, does it have to be one-to-one digital object to archival object, and
Gotcha.
it can only be item to item? Can you do it at a broader level? And maybe you have a collection that is 100 physical photos, but you only want to digitize 10. How would you handle that in terms of linking within ArchivesSpace? What would you link it to?
That's a good question, and I'll give you the archival answer of it depends. But that's a great point. It probably, many collections don't warrant the scanning of 100 physical photos. You maybe just want to have a representative 10 or a sampling. You do not have to have a one-to-one relationship to link a digital object instance. So let's go back to the public. Let's go to the staff side of this collection. So for the Alabama retail shops example, this is a complex digital object. I'm going to use it to link in just a second. But let's say you only wanted to link directly to, I want to find a good example. Maybe there isn't a good example. But to answer your question, you do not need to have a one-to-one relationship. You could even have a digital object instance at the collection level where maybe, let's use this example of this diary. You wanted to provide a scan of the diary, but you didn't want to include all of those individual photos. You could just have a PDF that you include as a digital object instance at the top level. You can add a digital object instance at any level. So you could have a collection level with many, or a collection with many archival objects, many series, however you want to describe your material, but you only want to have a few representative images, or you only want to maybe include a photograph of the creator. I mean, you could get creative with it. And you only wanted to link that to the top level, you could do that. Or if you only wanted to digitize 10 photos and include them as archival objects and only link to those specific 10, you could do that as well. This would probably be a great use case for the make representative functionality we're going to talk about later. So I'll say, keep your ears open for that, and thinking about how if you only want to have a sampling, how maybe you can make representative imagery a part of your public user interface that way. But no, you do not have to have a one-to-one archival object to digital object instance to link that way. You can link them at any any level of collection. So just thinking out loud, maybe you only want to link at the series level and you have representative images from individual series. It really would be up to you. And I'd be interested to know if there are other organizations that choose to be prudent in how they apply digital object instances to their archival objects. Any other questions about linking a digital object instance to an archival object instance, or anything about subjects and agents at all? I just wanted to make sure people knew that that was possible.
There's a few questions that we're just kind of anticipating what you're going to be talking about related to make representative a little later. So, you know, certainly that can wait.
Okay.
There's one question, and this might be a make representative question, or it may be something else. And maybe this would be, you know, since you have the PUI up, maybe it'd be worth looking at. And that's, Brett says there's an icon next to a few resources of collection organization, that section under PUI. Is that icon representing a type of digital object?
Yeah, I think, Brett, I think you're talking about when we were looking at the Krispy Kreme corporate records, and we were in this particular file, and you were seeing an icon in the collection organization. And so this is a good question. As you're scrolling through the collection organization, anywhere you see this icon, that means that there is a digital object related to this collection. So it's just a way to visually recognize that these materials do have a digital object instance. And it goes back to the question of, do you have to include a digital object instance in everything? No, you can be selective about when and how you apply digital object to materials. So anywhere you're scrolling through collection organization, you see that means that there's a digital object instance. So let's click this one. And you see we know right away there's a digital object here. We could go to that file, and then we could click this and go to the digital object record for this digital object instance of a Florida Krispy Kreme. I really want a donut. All right. Any other questions about what you're seeing on the PUI or linking collections or digital object instances? Okay. All right. We're going to change a little bit, topics a little bit. Let me clean up some of these tabs. All right. And we're going to talk about the ability to spawn a digital object record from an archival object record. So many of you are probably familiar with spawning functionality within ArchivesSpace that allows you to spawn an accession record or resource record or an archival object record from an accession record. That functionality is a little bit different than the functionality I'm about to show you, and the way that you invoke it and access it is different. But it is similar in the sense that what we're talking about here is basically some fields will be auto-populated for you as a time-saving measure. So the idea here is you have done all of that description for your archival object records, and you have your finding aid and you have your resource record created, and now you need to create these digital object instances and link to them, and you don't want to duplicate a lot of that effort, right? You don't want to have to create a record where much of the information is going to be the same. So that's why this spawning digital objects functionality is really handy and is something that you may want to take advantage of. I will point out that this functionality is new as of ArchivesSpace version 3.4.1. So if you are using an older version of ArchivesSpace, this functionality will not be available to you. So make sure you take a look at what version you're on at your home institution if you want to make use of this functionality. So to use this functionality, you will need to do a couple things. The first is you will need to enable it in your preferences. So depending on your permissions within your implementation, when you go, here's this little admin, this is my screen name, but when you're logged in, it tells you who you are and who you're logged in, the drop down here. This is where you can invoke a few different functions. Obviously, as the administrator of this implementation, I have all permissions here, but depending on your level of permissions, you probably or you may not have all three of these preference types. There's the ability to set preferences at a global scale, at a repository scale, and then your individual default preferences. I'm going to do it at a global scale because I can, and I just want to make sure that it happens everywhere. So here are global preferences. We're going to be coming back to this during Make Representative as well. So just keep in mind that if you want to make use of things like so the spawn digital objects, and then later if you want to be able to have representative images in your browse and in your staff user interface, just keep in mind this is where you invoke it. So again, I'll just repeat it. You go to the arrow by your screen name and you go to your preferences. So here we're going into global preferences, and for these purposes to spawn digital object instances, you need to make sure that this spawn description for digital object instances from linked record is selected. So the first thing you need to do to use this is to make sure that is selected. If you want to make use of other things like if you want to have other templating, you would invoke that here as well. We're not going to go over that today, but just make sure that this option is selected. And this is also in the user manual as well as in your quick start guide. So you don't have to worry if you think, oh no, I'm going to forget this. This is available in the Help Center. Once you've selected that, hit save. All right, so now your preferences have been updated. Okay, so now we're ready to spawn a digital object instance from an archival object instance, because that is something that we have now made available to us. Let's go to our spawning example. So I already have created an archival object instance from within the Krispy Kreme Corporation records that we've been working in. Just wanted to make sure I remembered where to go. So let's go to our resources. We'll go to Krispy Kreme, hit edit. And I created a record in this series of photographs. Scroll all the way down. And then I created a record for donut production. So I've already created this record. You know, if like Julia Childs, I already baked this and I pulled it out. So it's appropriate that we're using donuts. So we've got donut production here. So this is an archival object record that I've created. This is not a real example. This is for the purposes of the training, but I've created this record. And we're going to add a digital object instance. This is just like we did before. We're adding a digital object instance. The difference here is before we knew the record already existed, so we used type ahead just to create that link. Here, I'm going to go down and I'm going to hit create because I know the digital object instance doesn't exist, so I'll hit create. And if it had gone right, there would be information there. Maybe it just didn't catch up in time. Christine, did you see me do something wrong?
In terms of oath, because things should be spawned.
Yeah.
Can you just I know you did it, but you check the preferences.
Yeah, we'll double check. Yeah, we're checked.
Try one more time from your archival object.
Yeah.
There's also a suggestion for you to try clearing your cache.
Yeah. All right.
So that on the fly might be
yeah
not ideal for you.
Yeah. All right, so let's go back down to instances. You're going to see how to actually invoke it many times. Add digital object instance and then create. Not good.
Do you have any default values set that would interfere?
No, it shouldn't.
Then I'm stumped, honestly.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, you
Yeah.
know what? Check one more thing. Go to the middle level of preferences and try setting it there.
Oh, interesting. There you go.
All right. Sometimes, depending on
Interesting.
the context you're working in, sometimes things override in an interesting way.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, we learned something together, folks. All right, so it worked that time. So now let me actually do it magic, okay? None of that happened. So when you set your preference and select the populate records and preferences, save that. You go to the archival object record, which we now have seen many times that already exists, and you go down to your instances and you select add digital object instance and create. What should happen is what we're seeing here. So it will pre-populate some of the information from your archival object record to give you just that little bit of help so that you don't have to retype the title. You don't have to like reapply things like dates and that sort of thing. So depending on the information that you've provided, it will auto-populate some stuff for you. It doesn't it doesn't auto-populate an identifier. Obviously, that needs to be supplied by you, and you can't use the same identifier as you used for your archival object record. So that's something to keep in mind in order to save a valid digital object record, even though it has populated a lot of this information for us. You still have to provide an identifier. So I'll do that here. And with any of our spawning functionality, anything that we call spawning, but it's like an auto-populate, just because it auto-populated this information does not mean this record has been created in ArchivesSpace. That is true for if you're spawning in a session record, a resource record, an archival object record, and it's true here for creating a digital object record. You have to save it for that information to be retained. So even though it may look like you have a nice record here, nothing has been actually created or saved within ArchivesSpace. You need to save it yourself. So just keep that in mind. And let's go ahead and go and pull this. And I do want to apply a file URI, obviously. So I'm going to do that, add file URI. All right, so I've done everything that I needed to create that basic record. So I'm going to hit create and link. And now that digital object instance has been applied to this archival object. In theory, there also would be a container instance here, but for this example, there's just the digital object instance. And you don't necessarily even have to. Maybe this is just simply a digital photograph, and you want to make sure that it's expressed within your finding aid. So this would be an example of earlier when we talked about where do you put those links if you're not making use of the digital objects module in such a complex way, and you really just want them to be pointers. This is a pointer. We just use the digital object record to make sure that we were expressing them in that way, and then link them to the archival object record. So we've done that. I'm going to go ahead and hit save on that. Because even though we did just create that record and apply that link, we still haven't actually saved the connection between the two. So that's what I just did. And now you can see that in addition to the file, there's a digital object there. And if we drop back down to instances and we select that instance and we hit view, what will open up is the digital object record that we just created for this photograph. If you create it and you create that link and you're happy with it, you don't need to do anything else. But if you have more information you'd like to provide, you can always hit edit and then continue to edit that digital object record in that way. So that's how you make use of the spawning digital objects functionality. It is a preference you have to set within the application. And obviously you kind of need to play around with it there because it didn't apply for the global preferences, but we got there in the end. Any questions about that?
There is a question about whether you can customize what fields are spawned. There is no, you cannot do that. There is a feature request for that. I'll try to track down the URL for the feature request, but you cannot do that currently.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm catching up on the Q&A right now. And thank you everybody who's been responding to other people's questions and things. That's great. It's nice to be able to see how people are using ArchivesSpace and just to add insight to the things we're discussing. All right. Right, and someone's asking, what was the level of permissions you needed to tweak to make the spawn feature work? So you should be able to, in theory, you should be able to apply that no matter what your permissions are. It would just be that you would be able to apply it at different levels. So while we did have a snafu with it live, and that's something we can look at later, the preference management levels are global preferences, which a person would need to be a sysadmin or an admin for your entire ArchivesSpace implementation to have global preferences. This means that the actions that they're taking impact everyone. So if they wanted to have a specific column viewable in browse, that then they did it in the global preferences, that means that you would start seeing that column in your when you were logged in your ArchivesSpace view. Repository preferences, that would only impact a specific repository within your ArchivesSpace implementation. So if you're an ArchivesSpace that has multiple repositories in one ArchivesSpace, that's what that would mean. It would only impact that one repository. And then if you just have the default preferences, that is just you as a user. So you could go in and change preferences there and they would impact you only in your view. One thing to keep in mind is the way that preferences work is your preferences will overwrite repository preferences, and repository preferences will overwrite global preferences. So really the more granular the preferences, they take precedent. So if you have a certain view you like ArchivesSpace to be, or maybe you like ArchivesSpace to be expressed in a certain language, that would take precedent if you're doing it in your own specific view over a global or repository preference. But the actual ability to do that would be at any level of repository of preferences. All right, any other questions? All right, great. Okay, so we're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule. I do want to take a break and, everybody take a deep breath and get ready to talk about make representative functionality. And I want to get all of those examples together. So let's go ahead and move into a break. Since we are ahead of schedule, let's take a 15-minute break this time. And let's come back at 5 minutes after the hour. So we'll take a 15-minute break and everyone come back at 5 minutes after the hour. And if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to drop them into the chat or the Q&A. All right, welcome back, everyone. We are moving into our final hour together. We had 3 questions come in the Q&A during the break, so I'm going to go ahead and answer those really quickly before moving on to talk about make representative functionality. I'm going to answer them backwards in the opposite order that they were received. So the first question, Kristen, you asked, what are classifications? So we're not going to have time to go over the classifications module today. I would really recommend in the Help Center, there's a recording of a subjects, agents, and classifications training that was offered recently. You might want to take advantage of that, or maybe look at the classification section of the user manual. But that's a way to group like materials together. And it really is defined by the organization how they view those groupings. So for example, if you maybe work in a college archive and you want to group the records of the provost and the records of the president and that sort of thing. So that's how you can make use of classifications to link relevant records together. But definitely check out the Help Center for more information. And then Hillary asks, can anyone speak to how you're formatting the digital object if you want to show that there are digital materials, but it's restricted to, say, like reading room? Lauren, you touched on this. You add the file version unpublished and add something in the note field. Hillary, again, great question for the listserv too. So if you want to get an answer from the broader ArchivesSpace community, I would recommend the listserv, but this is a very good question. So if anyone has restrictions on their digital materials, but they're still including the file URIs in ArchivesSpace, it'd be interesting to hear how you're navigating that. Obviously not publishing them is a great way to doing it. Maybe, flagging information in notes fields, or maybe if you're using a digital asset management system, there's like a way for them to provide a barrier or restriction so that even if someone does inadvertently get access to the link, they can't go any farther than clicking it. But that's a great question. And Jamie posted their use of classifications, and they call them collection categories. So check that out in the answered Q&A section. All right, and then so Tom says it's a make representative question, but I wanted to go ahead and answer it and maybe see if there was some communication in the chat that could spur up around this. So in the public user interface, how can I indicate or display a link that a digital object exists at a higher level in the hierarchy when I'm looking at a lower level description? For example, I might just have one URL that points to the entire collection's worth of objects, but my resource has a more detailed hierarchy. I want to make sure this is indicated on every archival object in the collection. It's definitely another it depends question. So I'd be curious if other people are managing their digital objects in that way. At a previous institution, I did something similar, Tom, to what you're describing. I applied a digital object instance at the collection level with the intent of, with the best intentions of going back and adding the individual digital object instances. But if your intent is not to do that, maybe providing information in an inherited field so that there's a note there that indicates there's material higher in the hierarchy or at the collection level. I'm not really sure. Maybe there's someone here that can offer a suggestion, or again, a great question for the listserv. So maybe as we're going over this make representative functionality, that will spur an idea for you, Tom, but it'd be interesting to see what others have to say as well. All right. So with that, we are going to start talking about this make representative functionality that I have brought up so many times and not told you a lot about, right? So this functionality, this make representative functionality that we're about to talk about, it was also became available in ArchivesSpace version 3.4.1, just like the spawning digital objects. So if you're using a version of ArchivesSpace that predates 3.4.1, you will not have this functionality in your application. If you are using version 3.4.1 or newer, you have this functionality. It is available out of the box in ArchivesSpace. It's not a thing that you have to go into permissions and turn on, even though I am about to go into preferences and do add it to a column. You'll see that in just a minute, but you don't have to do anything to turn it on. It is already available within the application if you are using 3.4.1 or newer. If you are using an older version of ArchivesSpace, or if you've been using the digital objects module for a while, you probably remember that there was a way to, we said add a thumbnail to ArchivesSpace that wasn't official functionality, but it was, we included it in the user manual because it was so popular, but it was a way to get a thumbnail to display on your digital object record instead of the little file icon that says go to file. It required several different conditions. You had to make sure you were using a specific file type. You had to make sure you were using a JPEG, a PNG, or a GIF. And you needed to make sure that you were including an X-Link show attribute of embed. And there were a few other things you had to do to make sure that it displayed in the appropriate way. With 3.4.1, we took that very popular sort of like do-it-yourself feature and made it an official part of the application. You now can include a representative image on a digital object as well as an archival object, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute at the resource level. And this might be something you're interested in, Tom, as you were talking about like how you want to display your images. So I'll show you how to do both of those things. It is very conditional on how you are describing your digital objects and the information that you are providing, and also your file type. So I want to go through very slowly and talk about what is required to use make representative functionality, and then the three ways that you can get that image to display within the application. Before I do that, I want to point out that even though we are now going to start seeing images within the application, they do not live in the application. Nothing has changed. We are not importing or uploading material into ArchivesSpace. It is still not a digital asset management system. It still does not live in ArchivesSpace. It lives somewhere else. You now just have the ability to view it from within ArchivesSpace, and then instead of having an icon that you click, you can click the image. So keep that in mind. It does not change anything that I said earlier about it not being a digital asset management system. The image does not live in ArchivesSpace. So let's go ahead and look at it. One thing that you may want to keep in mind, and I'm going to go ahead and do now, is I'm going to go into my preferences. And you can change your browse columns for most record types here. I'm going to go to my digital object browse column, and I'm going to add thumbnail image as a browse column now. So before, when we were browsing digital objects, that column was not there. I'm going to go ahead and save that preference, and I'm going to go to browse digital objects. So now that column is there, you can see that we already have some digital objects within the application that meet the requirement for having an image show, for make representative to be invoked. These other items, the reason that they do not have a representative image here is because they do not meet the requirement to be a representative image. Most likely is because they are not one of the three required file types to have a representative image in ArchivesSpace. To have a representative image in ArchivesSpace, you need to make sure your file is either a JPEG, a PNG, or a GIF. All other file types, you can still put the file URI there, and you can have them as digital objects in ArchivesSpace. They will just look like what we have seen so far, where it has an icon that says go to file. So if you remember, every time we've been in the PUI, we have not seen an image. We've just seen that file icon that says go to file. And that's because none of the examples I've used so far have been JPEGs, PNGs, or GIFs. So let's talk a little bit about make representative functionality in general. For an item or for a digital object to show up in your public user interface or your staff user interface, like I said, it needs to be a JPEG, a PNG, or a GIF. And again, this is in your quick start guide, and it's also in our help center, but it needs to be one of those three file types. It must be published. You must have publish selected or have selected publish all. And if you didn't select publish, even if it meets all of the requirements, it will not render as a representative image in the public user interface. So you need to make sure you're publishing. And as we're moving through, you're going to also notice ArchivesSpace, even though we're calling them thumbnails, ArchivesSpace does not resize the image. So whatever you're putting in there, it's going to be the size of the image you put in there. So you may want to use an outside tool to resize your images to something that displays a little bit better for you. I did not do that here. I used the JPEGs that I found. And for the examples here, you will see since we were all, or not all, but many of us were in Chicago for SAA, I just use images from Chicago. And as we're browsing, you can see this is the library who had our member forum 1 week ago today. So just a nod to SAA and where we all were a week ago, into our member forum where we're enjoying the virtual training as part of that member forum today. So that's what these images are. I did not resize them. They're just free images I got off the internet. So you'll see what I mean about it not resizing today. And even if you have multiple instances that you really like and you may want to have multiple versions that are representative, you can only pick one. You can only have one image on a record that's a representative image. So keep those things in mind. So let's go ahead and look at the 3 ways that you can have a representative image in ArchivesSpace. And I will mention that, let's go to this first example. I will mention that if you are an organization that used the old sort of secret way of having a thumbnail and use the Xlink show attribute of embed, you, in theory, as long as you do have those correct file types, you should not need to change how you have described your digital object records. You should be the 3 different ways that you can indicate a record as representative should kind of catch you, so that you don't have to go back and clean up a lot of data. That being said, you may see, whenever you're looking, you may see some broken images or things that don't look right, and this will help you troubleshoot those to see, am I meeting one of the requirements here for this to be a representative image? What is missing here? So I've gone ahead and I've created 3 different representative images, or 3 different digital objects with representative images, and each one I have described in a different way, in one of the 3 ways required to make something representative. And then I understand that this is probably going to be, kind of fast. So please do look at the user manual. Please do look at your quick start guide. But just keep in mind, if you want to make use of this representative functionality, there are several ways you can go about it. And the very easiest way is what I have done in representative image 1. So in this image, I have a file type that meets the requirement. I'm using a JPEG here. It is published. And one of the 3 ways that you can mark an image as representative is you can select this Make Representative button that we've been seeing all day. Select it. And when you do, it will turn this blue pill, this little blue pill will appear, and you have indicated this image is representative. So now ArchivesSpace will know, okay, this person wants this to be a representative image. They want the image to display, and ArchivesSpace will check to make sure it's a JPEG, PNG, or GIF, that it's published, that it meets the requirements. And if it does, it will render the image. So let's go to the public user interface. And like I said, ArchivesSpace does not resize for you. This is the actual size of this photograph. That is very large. You probably don't want something that large. So keep in mind as you're using this, if you're starting to implement it, resize your images or use a true thumbnail. And I added a general note here just to make it obvious that the Make Representative functionality is enabled in the staff and public user interface because this is an acceptable visual file content type. The record has been published, and I selected the Make Representative button. That is why this image is displaying. So that's one of the ways that ArchivesSpace you can invoke the Make Representative functionality. As the application is looking at your work and trying to see if you do have any digital objects that you want to be representative, this is the first thing that ArchivesSpace is looking for. So if it finds the Make Representative button has been selected and you meet all of the requirements, they'll say, great, perfect, this is your representative image. So even if you have multiple images or multiple file URIs, and you maybe have marked one as representative and another meets another requirement that we'll see in just a minute, if ArchivesSpace finds that Make Representative button has been pressed, it stops there. This is the Make Representative image that it will select. So this is how the first way that you can create a representative image in ArchivesSpace. The second way that you can create a representative image in ArchivesSpace is, you see here, for the purposes of this example, I did not select Make Representative. So you can see I did not do what I just did to get a representative image. I did something else. The second way that you can get a representative image in ArchivesSpace is to select a use statement of thumbnail. So, and again, to be a file type that is acceptable: JPEG, PNG, GIF, and published. So that's how this is a representative image, because I selected a use case of thumbnail. If I had another file version here that I had selected as representative and it was published in one of those file types, that would be the representative image, not this one. But because there is no make representative selected here, ArchivesSpace says, oh, this is the representative image because you've met the three conditional requirements here for a representative image. So a use statement of image thumbnail is the second way that you can have a representative image in ArchivesSpace. And this is what it looks like on the public user interface. And again, in the general note, just so you know, it's an acceptable file type, it's published, and in this case, I use the image thumbnail use case as the way to have a representative image. Let's see, let's close these. All right. And then the third way that you can invoke the make representative functionality for a digital object is, and again here, I have no use statement. I did not select make representative. What I did here to invoke make representative functionality and a displaying image is I selected for the X-link show attribute, I selected embed. In that old way that I mentioned before, this was like official part of ArchivesSpace functionality. An X-link show attribute of embed is how you got the thumbnail to appear. So if that's something that you were doing in the past, this, like I said, it should catch you. So you should still, as long as you don't have another JPEG, GIF, or PNG file version on this record that is either marked as representative or has a use statement of thumbnail, this will display for you. So this is really here to help those organizations that were using that workflow in the past not have to clean up a lot of messy data. But this is the third way that you can have make representative functionality show up in the application. So let's see what that looks like in the public user interface. So here you see what that looks like. And again, in the general note, the reason that this works is because my file URI begins with HTTP and has an X-link attribute of embed. So you'll see that again in our user manual and in your quick start guide. These are expressed, these three ways that you can have representative images at your organization. I would say, you know, pick one and do it that way at your organization. Don't try to remember all three. Just have a standard way if you want to make use of this functionality. And then this third example, I also went ahead and I added some hierarchy here. So we have some digital object component records. So this image is the representative image for the collection level or the top level digital object record, but that doesn't mean it's the only one that you can have. I've applied a representative image across every one of the digital object records. So you can have a specific digital object record here regardless of like if one already exists higher in the hierarchy, you can have a representative image. I also included here, just as an example, a third option. If you don't have a representative image, your digital object will still have that go to file version. So if you're not using, you know, PNGs, GIFs, or JPEGs, you can still include your digital objects. It's just going to have this familiar icon here instead of your representative image. Another thing to keep in mind, if you have a representative image that is assigned at your top level record, ArchivesSpace will display that at your top level record, but it does also display your other file versions depending on where your representative images live in your hierarchy. So I'm going to show you that right now in in a resource record, because that is really new functionality, having a digital object instance as a representative image within a resource record. I think that it's really cool functionality. It's something that I could see a lot of use cases for, not just in having like a one-to-one relationship between a digital object record and an archival object record and having the image display. That, I mean, while that is cool, I think that there are other use cases here for how having a representative image on a resource record could really amplify your record. So I think that that is a neat function, and I'm going to show you how that works in just a minute and how ArchivesSpace sort of looks for those representative images in a resource record. But before I do that, I want to check to see if there are any questions about what we just went over, because I know it is a lot.
So there is a question about Sorry, I'm just reading it now. So just the question of, can somebody have a representative image that's the appropriate file type to display within the page, but actually links to something else that might be in a different format that doesn't display in the page? And the answer is yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
you can
that's
do
a
that.
great question. And yeah, and the answer is yes. You can have, just like you said, you can have a, let's scroll down. If you have here, I only and for all of the examples that I've used so far today, I've only had one file version, but in the example that you just gave is a great example of why you might have two file versions within one single digital object, right? Like you have your JPEG that is a use copy, but then you have your TIFF that is maybe a preservation copy or not something that you want to highlight as much as you want to highlight that JPEG, or you do want to have the JPEG simply because you want to have the representative image and you want people to link out to the actual content, which may be a PDF or something. The way that you would do that is that you would add an additional file version. So you would go to add file version, and you would add the file URI that you would want to be linked out to. So the way ArchivesSpace kind of negotiates this is your representative image, that first image, the JPEG, the PNG, or the GIF, that is going to be what displays within the application. What you list as your second file URI is what is going to be linked out to. So it is entirely possible to do that. You would just have multiple file versions.
And Kayla just provides like an explanation of how they do it at their institution. And Lindsay asked if, just to clarify,
Yeah.
all of these methods, they don't resize the image, correct?
Yeah, and that is correct. So even though we're using the word thumbnail within the application, ArchivesSpace itself doesn't manipulate the image in any way because it doesn't live in ArchivesSpace. So whatever size it is the size it's going to display. So if you have an image that is a little large, you might want to use an outside tool to resize it to be something more appropriate. Otherwise, you're going to end up with the examples that I just showed you, where your pictures are huge and you have to scroll to get down to your description. And then I see Tara asked, how does it know which one to link out to? So it's just like with everything I'm describing, ArchivesSpace kind of has to think through a process. Like it looks to see if make representative is selected, and then it looks to see if there's one that has a use case of thumbnail, and then it looks to see if there's an X-link show attribute of embed. It looks to see if you have a second file URI, and if you do, that's the one that it links out to. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go home. And now I'm going to show you how you can make use of the make representative functionality within a resource record in the application, and how that might benefit your users, or some thoughtful ways you could use that. So I'm going to go, I've already done this one. This is a fully baked cake. I'm just going to show you how this works. So I'm going to go to the Krispy Kreme corporate records. And if you've been, every time I've gone to the resource records, you've probably seen this donut here. And that's a representative image that I added whenever I was cooking up these examples. So let's go to our Krispy Kreme corporate records here. All right, so we're at the collection level for Krispy Kreme corporate records. And you saw when we were browsing, what we saw on the browse screen was that collection level description and the ability to open up the collection for the Krispy Kreme corporate records. And in that column, we saw a donut. So how did I make that donut show up there? If we scroll down, this is the top level collection level resource record. If we scroll down to our instances, there are no instances. There's not a digital object instance here. I did not add that donut here and make it representative. So how did it show up at the collection level? If we go to, let's go and view published. If we go to the PUI for the Krispy Kreme corporate records, you see there's that donut. It's there. There's a picture there, and it's also telling me that there are more digital objects in the collection than just this donut, and it gives me the option to browse all of the digital objects in this donut. So how did I do this? It's not an instance at the collection level. This is really neat functionality, but also just something to keep in mind. So what the image that we are showing is at the collection level is actually from an archival object record deeper in the hierarchy. So that it's, if we want to find it, it's within the photographs. Scroll down, and here it's the donut that I created. So within photographs, there's this donut. So, and it has one instance, one digital object instance. If we view that digital object, let's open it in edit mode, and we look at it. Okay, it meets all of the requirements for a representative image, right? It's the right file type. I've marked it as published, and I selected make representative, so it's got a little blue representative pill. Good. We know that I've done everything on the digital object that I could do to mark this as representative. Then I went to the archival object record for this donut from within our resource record, added a digital object instance, and linked the digital object record we just looked at. I showed you how to do that earlier. I did that. Then I took the added step of mashing the make representative button within the archival object record. That is how I was able to indicate to ArchivesSpace, I want this to be a representative image within my resource record. That's how I did that. So now ArchivesSpace knows to look through this whole resource record and try to find representative images. ArchivesSpace is doing that for all your representative images if you're using 3.4.1 or newer. It's looking to see if your resource records have any representative images in them. And if they do, they pull them up and they highlight them at the collection level. So it could be nested anywhere in your hierarchy, but the first representative image that it finds that meets all of those requirements that we talked about, it will make the representative image for your collection. So that's something to keep in mind if you want to start making use of this functionality and you don't want it just to be pulling, the first image that it finds from somewhere down, in your collection, and maybe one of your interns accidentally marked it as representative, and now your representative image for a collection is like a completely decontextualized photograph of somebody's birthday party or something. You want to be mindful about how you apply this representative imagery for your collection level. You may even want to go so far as to go into the collection level record itself and add a digital object instance that can be used as a representative image. I think that this is cool. I think there's a lot of ways that you maybe could use functionality like that, like maybe highlight a photo of it could be a representative image of the collection, or it could be maybe like a photo of a creator, especially if you're doing like oral histories and stuff. I just think that there's a lot of possibility with this, and I think it's really neat functionality. But the application itself, if there is any representative image indicated anywhere in your hierarchy, it is going to show that at the collection level as the representative image for this collection. And then when you are browsing your resources, if you have added your thumbnail image column, which I did in advance, then you're able to see the representative images for each of these collections when you're browsing. The same is true for digital objects. I just added this column live. So anywhere there's a representative image for a digital object, it will show that as well. All right. Christine, anything to add or any questions?
There was one question that somebody had about why they weren't seeing it, and it was because they were in an older version.
Yeah.
This came in with version 3.4, which I think you mentioned at the beginning. But just to reiterate, people who are working on an older version of ArchivesSpace, they won't have all these features. They will be able to see images under certain conditions, but not all of these different ways, all of these different improvements that went into how you can specify what images would show in the public interface and where they show in the public interface. That came in about a year ago.
Yeah, thanks. And that's also true for the spawning digital objects from archival objects that I showed earlier. That functionality came in with the same release. So yeah, if you're using something older than 3.4.1, you wouldn't be able to use this or the spawning digital objects from archival objects. All right. Any other questions about this functionality? Again, look in the Help Center. There's some really good documentation. Our user documentation sub-team did a great job writing this documentation because it is so conditional. And there's also some links in your quick start guide that will be helpful. All right. Then let's go ahead and move into, let's get a look at our agenda. All right.
Just a second before you move
Yeah.
on, Jessica. Esty says she would like to hear the answer to Tara's question. But Tara's had a few questions, Esty, so maybe you could just reiterate which one you're interested in. If it's the question about how does ArchivesSpace know which one to link out to, just Jessica, maybe you could just reiterate again, which file version is the file version that's a link versus the file version that displays in the interface.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So let's go ahead and just pull up just an image, a digital object. So for all the examples that I've given you so far today, I've only included one file version. So it's not always the case. You normally or sometimes may have multiple file versions. And the way that ArchivesSpace would know which one was a representative image, that again, that you'd have to meet one of those requirements that we talked about, having that relevant file type, being published, and then either doing selecting make representative, having a use statement of thumbnail, or an X-link show attribute of embed, and that's how you would get the representative image itself. And then when you would click that, it would take you to wherever that JPEG lived, unless you had an additional file version that was marked as that was not the representative image. So if you had a secondary file version, you would do that by just hitting this plus or going to add file version, and you would add this additional file version, your TIFF or whatever, whatever you wanted to link out to, maybe your content DM, whatever. You would put that there, and then ArchivesSpace, whenever the representative image would display within ArchivesSpace, but when you clicked it, it would send you to the second link. So just keep that in mind, that the order of your file versions, especially if you have a whole bunch of file versions, is important, but ArchivesSpace will link to the second.
And Sue asked, does the second file version need to be published for this to happen?
Yes, anything that you want to be available in the public user interface needs to be published, and ArchivesSpace does not assume any of this is published until you indicate either select the publish box or publish all. So you would need to, if you want anything in the PUI, you need to select publish. All right. Okay, so somehow we managed to end up behind time. I should have known that. So the last thing that I want to very quickly go over are import and export options for digital objects in ArchivesSpace. I am not going to have time to fill out any of the import templates. I'm just going to show you where to invoke them, or where to download them, and then where to invoke them. There's two different types. Before I do that, I'll show you the easiest thing, which is how to export digital object metadata. That's very quick. So I'll go ahead and show you how to do that first, and then we'll talk about different ways to import digital object metadata and why you might want to use one way over another. But if you want to export out your digital object metadata, you have a collection that you want to export and put somewhere else or use in another way. The way that you would do that is you would go to the record that you would like to export. This is the complex digital object that we created earlier today. And from your upper right, you have this toolbar. We've mostly been using that to move in between the PUI and the SUI today, but there's a lot of other big functions that you can do here. And depending on your permission type, you may not have all of them, but this is where you can export your metadata for your digital object record. So very easy. You just select the digital object metadata type that you want to download. You select download, and it will do that for you. It will run that and export out the digital object metadata. I think I hit share my whole screen. Okay, so you see here, I'm not going to open it because it would just take a whole thing and it would open up Oxygen, and I don't want to do that. But you can see here that it has exported out a mods file for me there. So you, very simple. You just go to export from within the record that you're in and select the metadata type that you want to export out. All right. I'm looking at the Q&A right now. It looks like Christine is answering Tara's question. So Lauren, are there bulk export options for digital objects? If you want to export out specific information about your digital objects, one thing that you can always do is you can go to your browse screen and download a CSV, and the CSV that will be downloaded will essentially be the columns that you've indicated in your digital objects browse screen. You can do that for like things like accession records and stuff too that don't have a ton of export options. That's one way to get information out in bulk. Another thing, depending on the information that you want, you could run a report. So we have custom reports as well as CAN reports who may be able to get at the information you're after. But if you're trying to download, or I'm sorry, if you're trying to like export out metadata in bulk, probably your best bet would be, I'm just going to say like the PUI or something. But to like actually go in and export out metadata, you have to go to the individual record you want the metadata for and export it that way. But yeah, there's different reports and things, and the download CSV is always handy if you're just trying to get like a snapshot of your digital object ecosystem. All right, so that's exports. Okay, so there are two bulk import template types that I'm going to go over for digital objects. One really cool feature in ArchivesSpace, and again, I think this was 3.4 as well. I think this is new functionality as of 3.4, but it is newer functionality. So again, if you don't have this from at your organization, check your instance. It may need to be updated. But if you remember, the way that we used to have to access the bulk import templates was through GitHub. Now you can download the bulk import templates from directly within the application. You just go to the gear menu and you hit bulk import templates, and then all of the different bulk import templates and types are here for you to download, and then they're described, so you can pick which one you need and download it from there. So I think this is very cool. So the first bulk import template you may want to consider using is the digital object CSV, and you would just download that and open it up as a CSV. Oh, yeah, it's going to take forever. So this allows for users to import digital object records and records linked to digital object records. So if you want to link, bring in agent records, subject records, if you have event records that you want to bring in, you can bring in linked record types like that through this spreadsheet as well. But this is specifically for if you have digital objects that you want to bring in to ArchivesSpace. It doesn't provide any linkage to archival objects or anything like that. So keep that in mind. You're just bringing in digital objects and any of their linked records like subjects and agents. As with all of our templates and all of our spreadsheets, keep in mind the order of the fields is important. Unless you are very comfortable with the ArchivesSpace data model, please do not delete any columns. You can hide columns that you don't want. You can hide columns and compress the spreadsheet so that it only includes the required information that you want to import in, or have a very minimal template. That's perfectly fine to hide those columns, but do not delete columns. And the order the fields are in is very important, and that you would be very unhappy with your import if you did that. And keep in mind that if you, just like we showed in the actual application itself, I'll get away from that, it's ugly. Just like we showed within the application itself, if you open up if you start providing information in what is a subrecord of ArchivesSpace, and you you inadvertently begin recording information that makes other things required or conditionally required, make sure you are mindful of that. So for example, if you start typing in and you add a date type, you're then going to have that date label, and you're going to have a date expression. Remember that. So as you're building out the spreadsheet, keep in mind these map directly to fields within the application. And if you start adding fields that open up other required fields, make sure you're including all the information that you need to include in the spreadsheet. But this is just a way to get all of those digital objects into ArchivesSpace. Once you have completed your spreadsheet, the way that you can import the material is you can go to two different ways. You can go to create background job, or you can go to the gear menu and go to background jobs. And either way, you can create a job and import in information. So you would go to import data. You would add that CSV, that file type, and make sure you tell it what it's importing. So this is the digital object CSV, and you add that file type and you start the job. The first time you do this, it will probably fail and you'll get some error messages. If you need help figuring out where the errors are or where there's maybe some issues with the data, put that in the listserv. Many people have used these import templates and have come in contact with errors and can give you some tips and tricks. So do not panic if you get a failed background job the first time you run it. Just parse through those error messages and go to the listserv if you need some help. But that is how you would download the digital object CSV template and then import the data through a background job. And again, this digital object CSV template is just if you have digital objects you're looking to get into ArchivesSpace, and it will bring those digital objects into ArchivesSpace and then any relevant link records that like subject and agent records. So that's one option. Another option, let's go back to our bulk import templates. Another option, and this is part of the most popular functionality in ArchivesSpace, so I'm sure many of you are familiar with the load via spreadsheet functionality within ArchivesSpace. What you would want to do here, talking about digital objects, is you're looking at one of these two options: this bulk import digital object CSV or bulk import digital object Excel file. So this gives you the option of working in either Excel or a CSV, your preference. The reason you would use this template is because you want to create digital objects, but you want to go ahead and link them to existing archival objects as well. So you already have a resource record with all of the relevant archival object records, and you're trying to bring, not just create digital objects, but create digital objects and link them to your pre-existing archival object records. So that's why you would want to use this one. Keep in mind also that if you're using ArchivesSpace version 3.2 or newer, you do have the ability to ingest multiple digital objects or create multiple digital objects and associate them with a single archival object. So that was functionality that people have been wanting in this spreadsheet. And after version 3.2, you can now do that. So you can have multiple digital objects linked to one archival object through this spreadsheet. Another thing I want to point out, because it is different than really kind of anything else that we've talked about today, that when you ingest and create digital objects using this spreadsheet and associate them with the archival object, ArchivesSpace will make the published state of your digital object whatever the published state of your archival object is. So this is one area where it assumes some published status. So keep that in mind. If you're already publishing all of your archival objects and you're not quite ready to publish your digital object metadata. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But you can decide, depending on how you want to work, if you want to work with a CSV or with an Excel file. You just hit download and it'll bring up that spreadsheet for you. All of the same caveats that I said about the digital object CSV apply here. Do not delete columns unless you are very, very, very comfortable. You know what you're doing. Make sure that you are including all of the required information. And if you start messing with conditionally required fields, make sure you include all the fields there that are required, and feel free to hide as many columns as you want to make it as limited a spreadsheet as you need for your use case. Just so you can, even though it's very scary when you see something this long, you can always hide things. So this is a really popular spreadsheet to use because it not only creates your digital objects, but it also links your digital objects. And then the way you would import your and create your digital objects that way is different. So you would not go directly as a background job to do that. You would go to the collection, the resource record that already exists that you are looking to link these digital objects to. So we'll just use this as an example. So this is a resource record that already exists. We already have all of our archival objects here, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the different options here, but the one we're going for is load via spreadsheet. This is also where you would go if you were using the import archival object spreadsheets for load via spreadsheet, but this is where you would go for this. It is different from running, it does run it as a background job, but it is different from just going to the background jobs and doing what I showed earlier. So here, you would make sure that you were selecting add digital objects to archival objects. You would select your file. And then I really recommend, because I think it's very handy functionality here, the first time you run it, select only validate and then import it. Don't give yourself that opportunity. Give yourself the opportunity to validate it, troubleshoot any data issues you may have, and then try to do an import into the system. So this is an opportunity to use a validation tool that I think is really cool. So I would recommend the first time you try to import your spreadsheet, validate only, see if there's any errors, and then the next time you can import the spreadsheet and link that way. So that's how you would import digital objects and link them to archival objects. So keep in mind that's you'd only use this spreadsheet if you wanted to do that specifically, link to your archival objects. And also keep in mind that you do not run it directly as a background job. You go into the resource record and select load via spreadsheet that way. So those are the two import templates for digital objects. We got a little bit behind time. I knew I'd do that. So, but those are the two ways to import that. They're very popular. Again, the listserv can be really helpful if you're having any error messages that you want help parsing out. But those are the two ways that you can get digital objects into your instance in bulk through the staff user interface. Any questions about that, or at this point, any questions about anything? We have 9 more minutes together.
So there's a couple questions that are kind of just, just asking you to clarify or repeat things that you already said. So one is about for the import templates, can the metadata be for more than one collection series, subseries, or do you need to make separate import files for each collection series and subseries?
So for the what I just showed, where you're importing digital objects and linking them to archival objects, it would be at the collection level. So you would need to create a different one for each collection that you were trying to do that for, but you would not need to do that for each individual series or subseries. You could do it at the collection level. For the digital object CSV, those would be, Christine can correct me if I'm wrong, those would be imported as simple digital objects, and you would be able to import as many as you would like. Is that correct, Christine?
You can, so the kind that are invoked from a particular resource, you can't do them across multiple resources, but you can do them across multiple archival objects. Yeah.
For the digital object import CSV, not the bulk import load via spreadsheet functionality, that you could put as many digital objects in that as you wanted. It doesn't really matter in terms of like collection or anything like that. You would just be getting lots of digital objects in bulk into your application, right?
Right.
Right. Okay.
And then the other question was just it looks like Lauren found her answer, but just you mentioned some functionality tied to a specific version.
Yeah.
In terms of being able to link, I think, multiple digital objects.
Yeah.
So just if you would repeat what version that was.
Yeah, so if you are looking to use the bulk import template, the load via spreadsheet template to create digital objects and link them to archival object records that already exist in the system, you can use that spreadsheet in earlier versions, but as of version 3.2, you have the ability of linking two archival or two digital objects to one archival object record. So if you have questions about that, or if you don't remember what version I said, just go in the Help Center on each of these pages. If there's a version requirement, we do indicate that in the Help Center as well.
I'm going to skip Linda's question for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
And just the question about if there are known issues or special considerations for people who are using older versions of ArchivesSpace when they're using these spreadsheets. Hillary mentioned one, which is that newer spreadsheet templates might have functionality, might have columns there that don't actually weren't available in previous versions of ArchivesSpace. So you want to be careful about that. Um, Jessica, are there other things that you can think of when people are kind of using older versions of
Yeah.
ArchivesSpace and wanting to do this kind of functionality?
One thing to keep in mind that the load via spreadsheet functionality in general was only made available in ArchivesSpace version 2.8. So I do know that there are people here that are running earlier versions of that. So you would not have load via spreadsheet functionality available to you. So if you're not seeing that, that's one thing to consider.
And then Linda's question looks like more of an idea for a
Yeah.
training, but maybe there's something out there. She's asking about whether there's a Excel for ArchivesSpace users workshop, and maybe ways to get sort of like more conversant with using ArchivesSpace spreadsheet functionality and getting to know Excel a little bit better for this purpose.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And Linda, I'm going to tell you go to the listserv too. There's a lot of good listserv questions happening here. I'd be interested to know how other ArchivesSpace members educated themselves about Excel. I know that there are people using like OpenRefine to do really powerful things. So it'd be interesting to see what resources other archivists leaned on to learn Excel and go from there. And this is not Excel specific, but I'll also point out that we like a month or two ago we offered an import exports and reports training, and we offer that one pretty regularly. That one was envisioned for people who are maybe newer to ArchiveSpace or newer to using that functionality. But it spent more time walking through the spreadsheet import templates and using the spreadsheets and considerations for the spreadsheet. So it might be worth, if you're interested in learning more about how to do things in bulk and how to use the bulk templates in ArchiveSpace, to look at that training recording. And I'll also put in a plug. This fall, we are going to do kind of a part 2 to that training, which is intended to be data cleanup for longtime users. So very similar to what we're talking about, but the idea there is we know that at this point a lot of people have been using ArchivesSpace for years, and they maybe have gotten their data in, but now they're dealing with maybe some data cleanup, or the issue of, well, okay, everything's in there, but now we need to add more and that sort of thing. So that's a training that's coming up as well if people are interested, and keep in mind that recordings of all of our past trainings are available in the Help Center.
And then the last thing, this goes way, way, way back in the training, but someone had asked about whether we had like suggestions or preferred options for DAMs. This is for digital asset management systems to work with ArchivesSpace. And this really is kind of a listserv question. But Jessica, maybe you have some more specific suggestions to people of places to look, things to talk about.
Yeah, I think listserv is definitely a great suggestion for that, to see what other people are using. But if you're looking for another open source option, Omeka is one that you could look at. I know that one's very popular. There are some more robust dams like Preservica that I know have integrations with ArchiveSpace. You might want to go and look at our previous webinars. We had a few on integrations with systems like that. So that may give you an idea of what's possible. It really just depends on your use case. Not everyone maybe necessarily needs a really robust system, or maybe has some price considerations. And so there are many different ways that you can navigate that and still make your collections discoverable within ArchivesSpace. There are people that are managing things locally through various like cloud-based solutions, and they're managing their digital assets that way. But yeah, definitely a conversation for the listserv. All right. Any other questions? We are at a perfect time. All right. I'll speak slowly in case there's any last minute questions. But again, thank you all so much for attending this training and sticking it out until the end. As a reminder, the recording of this training will be made available in the ArchivesSpace Help Center, so you can always refer back to that later. Please do put that quick start guide somewhere handy. It links back directly to the Help Center, so you can always rely on that for more information as you go. And don't forget, there is a post-workshop survey for this training that it would be wonderful if you would fill out. We would appreciate that so much. Otherwise, thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.